Great. Well, I can see people connecting in, and I think let's just get started and they can join as they go on. So, firstly, it's January and it's another Planet IT webinar. It's nice to kick off 2026 with a cybersecurity webinar. Today, we are very much looking at what I'm calling the threat forecast. So, we're looking at what's happening in the space at the moment, what we see changing, and I suppose realistically what you guys need to be doing to make sure you're protecting your businesses from the current attacks that are out there. Now, I'm going to start by looking back at what happened in 2025, just to sort of set the scene for what's going on. And then we'll look at these emerging attack vectors. We'll look at how AI is changing the threat landscape, look a little bit about regulatory updates and compliance, talk about the tool sets throughout that you need to be looking at. I'm really not here to sell you product. I'm here to talk to you about the kind of products you need, and you'll see that as we walk through. And then I'm going to talk about disaster recovery and business continuity, because it really ties into this cyber landscape that we're looking at. And, you know, one of the biggest things is people are relying on their backups to survive. So without further ado, for those of you who are joining who don't know me, I'm James Dell. I'm the Technical Architecture Director here at Planet IT. And realistically, my role is to make sure that you're up to date with everything that's going on in the space. I get the pleasure of working with vendors to understand what their products look like and how they're combating the threats that are out there. And I'm going to digest that and then turn that into useful information. I'm always available to you. You're always free to reach out to me if you do have a question more specific to your business. But if you do have a question for today, then you do have the Q&A function. I do recommend that you use a Q&A function during this if you have questions, because if it comes into the chat, I might not see it. Also with the Q&A function, anything you ask will be anonymized, so we get to see it, and then we can sift through and we can ask the questions, sort of answer the questions in a way where everyone gets to get the information that they want without maybe giving away too much about your business. So definitely worth using the Q&A function all through the session, and I'll try and get to the questions at the very end once I've kind of delivered the bulk of the content, as it were. Again, for those of you who don't know Planet IT, it's a really simple slide. We are one of those brands that we are pleased to be trusted by so many household names, and you'll see those across those sectors. So from education through to biomed, through to public services, and then to the wider corporate space. We're proud to work with some of these organizations. And oh, is it saying not sharing my screen? Okay, thank you. That's a good start. Let's try again. Hopefully you can see that screen now. Yeah, good. Thank you, the thumbs up. That's the pleasure of Teams, right? So you know, they change something and it just stops working. So hopefully that's all working. Apologies for that. I'll take that and give myself a good stern telling off later. So yeah, Planet IT, trusted by a load of organizations, and we are proud to be in that space. We are that one-stop shop for all things IT. So everything from managed IT support all the way through to backup, disaster recovery, cybersecurity we're talking about today, and our professional services and your traditional hardware and software procurement. You need it, we can help with it. Now, I'm glad the slides are working, because you will have wanted to have seen this. So as always, we've got a little giveaway to run. So for those of you who stay to the end of the event, there is a £100 Amazon voucher to give away. So we've got one of these magical spinning wheels again. So if you've joined one recently, you would have seen that. So we'll do that at the end. So I'm glad the screen's sharing by the time I get to show you this. But without further ado, let's get into the kind of bulk of it, right? Let's start by looking back at last year. So 2025 was a big year for cyber, especially in the news. And these are just a few snippets of websites that I took at the back end of last year. So very much something that, you know, reflects the kind of way the world was. So we had huge telco espionage. We had multiple carriers being compromised with visible kind of gaps being detected in their asset management platforms. We had huge supply chain breaches, and that's kind of, you know, where a lot of these kind of major ones that hit the news came through, was through things like Salesforce and Drift and other products kind of being compromised. Essentially, authentication and integration risks being the main problem there. They came through their OAuth platforms to get into the wider data set. There was lots of autonomous and AI powered attacks. You know, it was a very early glimpse into kind of a low human in the loop operation. So where cyber cyber criminals were allowed to leverage AI to really start causing problems without needing a person on the end of it. We obviously had the UK retail and manufacturing impact with Jaguar Land Rover, which was 5 weeks. It was offline, over $1 billion in revenue hit, so much so it actually hit the GDP of the UK. You could see it actually have a visible effect as the supply chain was hit. There was also Harrods, M&S and the Co-op that all had data stolen and had major cyber outages. 16 million credentials were also lost last year via a giant credential stuffing exercise. So that's pretty bad for everyone, even in a personal space. But why does this all matter, right? So last year was full of identity abuse, software as a service, third-party risk, and AI accelerating, giving those with very low skill in the kind of threat landscape tradecraft they previously wouldn't have had. And it's very obvious that things are continuing to escalate. If we compare what happened last year and how public and how damaging these impacts were to businesses versus 2024, you can see that 2025 was a lot worse. And we can see that the bad actors are getting better. And that's the problem. And some of that, as we look forward, comes down to this reduced dwell time. And what I mean by that is I mean that there is less time for the detection to take place, less time for us to spot during that attack chain that something's happening. So it's harder for internal teams to spot what's going on without the right tool set. It's also harder to automate responses because the techniques and the way they're working are continuously changing, and they're using automation and AI to speed them up. So where previously we would have said the big thing is they'll get into the system and they will dwell for a very long time and they will wait looking for the right time. What we started to see towards the end of last year is the opposite effect. We started to see that these kind of 7 steps of an attack chain, steps 2 to 6 were happening in such a short time frame between them initially working out they wanted to attack you, getting in the system, and then taking over and getting their exploit run, because they were able to leverage so much more than they previously would have been able to in the AI and automation space. It's one of those things which means that, yes, AI is great, but what it is doing is meaning that as a bad actor, you don't need a huge team of people to be breaking into a system. One person can do it with a very smart bit of automation and AI on the back end of it. So let's flip that straight on his head, right? And let's have a look at what we need to do to respond to that shortened threat cycle, because the shorter the threat cycle is, the better we need to be, right? So things that you're going to need as a business, regardless of how you do this, is you're going to need threat response playbooks. What I mean by that is I mean automated playbooks, a way to respond to detections, to indicators of compromise, the way to respond to what threats look like in a structured and controlled way, something that you can do from an automated point of view. And that plays into the second point on this slide, which is around incident response automation. We want to be leveraging technology where possible to cut down the amount of time that we need to spend looking to respond to an issue. As the bad actors get faster and use more AI, we're going to need to do the same thing. We also need to make sure that we're not looking at siloed data. One of the biggest things that will cause you a risk that you will not be able to just instantly fix is this kind of siloed buckets of information. So your network telemetry, your firewall telemetry, your email telemetry, your endpoint telemetry, and anything from your software as a service platforms. The more separation there is in all of these buckets of data, and the harder it is for you to pull them together, the more complicated your response will be, the more likely you are to miss an indicator of compromise or an indicator of attack. And the more likely it is that a bad actor will be able to be successful because you won't have visibility. So you're going to need some kind of shared data lake. Now, I don't care if this is a SIEM tool or if this is a unified data lake like a blob storage or somewhere where, or a log system, anything where everything's ingested. What I care about is that your entire network telemetry is in a single pane of glass, so that when we are looking at those threat responses and when we're looking at automation, we're doing it over a single package of data. We are not looking at multiple sources. Alongside that, we need to be feeding in external information. So the first one would be threat profiling and vulnerability insights. So that's indicators of compromise, CVEs, bits of data that come from the external world that you can then use to pull in that outside data into your system so that you can use that to help you protect. It is no good only knowing about your system. We need to know about what's going on and where those threats are, where those vulnerabilities are. This then plays into external and internal attack surface management. We need to understand what our attack surface is, both from an outside point of view and from the systems that we manage. And we need to be more refined about how we see that information. That can't be a point in time check saying, oh, well, we did a pen test 12 months ago, we'll do one now. Oh, we did a vulnerability scan 12 months ago, it's time for another one. The vulnerabilities change daily, sometimes even hourly. We need to be pumping that information as quickly as possible into our threat responses and into our response automation and into our patching cycle. So what kind of solutions are we going to be looking at when we say, let's tackle all those things that you need? Well, the first one is some kind of XDR platform. So that's like the cross detection and response platform. Now, that's for if you internally have a strong security team, a group of people who can confidently look at data and apply threat response playbooks and apply the automation. If you're sat here thinking, I'm a one-man IT department or I've got 3 people, that's when you need to be looking at an MDR service or a managed detection and response service. You need to be putting the responsibility of looking at that shared data, applying those threat playbooks, applying the incident response to somebody else. And I want to be really clear, when I say a managed detection and response service, I mean a fully manned, automated system. I don't mean a 10-man business that can sort of do it or they offer some kind of managed SOC service. I mean a robust, technology-driven company, your likes of your Sophos, your CrowdStrikes, companies like that. You need someone that has the technology and the team built around it. If you want to continue to use different disparate technologies and you don't want to move to a vendor like that, then yes, you could do a managed SOC, but you're going to need to do a 24/7, 365 managed SOC that has at least 3 people looking at your data at all times. That's the minimum coverage. So if the SOC you're looking at has a total staff count of 15 people, they're not going to be able to deliver you that coverage in an effective way. You need a robust SOC to deliver that. The other way to do it is to build that SOC internally, is to go to management and say, look, we want an internal SOC, but you're going to need to buy the associated tools that go with that. That goes beyond the XDR platform. That's going to go into SIEM tools. It's going to go into SOAR tools. You're going to need to really invest into it. Alongside that, you then need to do vulnerability scanning. Now, I'm a big believer in the internal and external vulnerability scanning, and penetration testing should be automated. It should be monthly. And what it should be doing is covering all systems, and ideally in a way that is compliant with external standards. So I'm thinking about things like ISO 27001, Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, NIST, things like that. You want to use a tool that will tick those boxes at the same time. Don't double engineer, don't double charge. Most of those platforms will be able to push that data into the system for you. And that will help you if you can tick these solutions in one way or another. That will help you tackle this kind of shortened attack cycle. That's kind of the number one thing we're looking at as we move into 2026. As we move on into other threats that are coming down the road, the next one is kind of this industrialized cybercrime. And my metaphor here with my 2 criminals is, it used to be break-in. That's what we used to consider the kind of attack vectors. It was a hack. It was someone compromising data. It was someone finding a vulnerability. It was someone breaking down that front door or drilling through a window to get in. What we are not seeing anymore is that level of people kind of working out ways to break firewalls and that. They're actually going after credentials. So they're logging in. Essentially, they're coming in as a trusted user, a trusted endpoint, which presents you completely different problems, because the detection standard for is someone coming in in an unauthorized manner and has managed to compromise their way in is a lot easier to pick up than hold on, that person's logged in and they're now doing things. Is that genuine? And that's unfortunately the pivot that we're now taking. So if we look at that again, looking at the kind of what we need to think about, the first thing is posture. So when I say posture, it's looking at the tools and the systems you have and making sure that you have the ability to understand whether or not the technology that's provided by those vendors is being leveraged in a way that reduces your risk. Now, with all risk management, there's a case for saying we can't always solve the problem. And some things we very much have to accept. And we're in that position with this kind of risk management. You do need to accept some risks. And if we talk about something specifically like conditional access, you do need to say, well, we have to let people log in from somewhere. Otherwise, it's absolutely completely useless. But it's managing that risk and saying, well, if we don't do any business in Africa, we're not going to allow people to log in from an African IP address. That straight away reduces your risk portfolio or profile. And it might be that you say, actually, these users don't actually even leave the UK for work. Okay, well, let's tighten that down even further. And that continuous posture adjustment and risk checks is hugely important to make sure that you're ahead of the game and ahead of those consistent break-ins. When we talk about identities, we need to make sure that you're continuously looking at those identities for three things. Are they real? Are those identities genuine and they need to be online? Are they up to date? And are they correctly protected? Now, correctly protected will be multi-factor authentication, conditional access. Are they genuine users is always a big problem. You know, have they left? Have they changed role? Are they on maternity leave? Things like that. We need to be continuously monitoring those identities and make sure that they're properly adjusted across all platforms that form part of your infrastructure, not just AD or Entra ID or Google Workspace. Is anything that you build an account on, we need to make sure that that identity is correctly managed. And SSO is a huge win there. And you do a lot of that with SSO, but some platforms just don't support it still. Again, cross-platform visibility is huge. We need to make sure that you can see every platform that people log into and the telemetry data from that. And it comes back to what I was saying in the previous one. That needs to be a centralized logging system. That needs to come back into an XDR, a data lake, into a SIEM tool. You need to have those login events because that correlation will allow you to manage the risk and reduce the attack surface. We obviously then need to take this and be looking at what's already been lost. Now, dark web scanning for credentials has been there for a very long time. However, a lot of businesses don't give it the credence that it's worth because lots of your users will be using the same passwords, the same mobile phone numbers, all those kind of things in multiple places. And there is a huge chance that that one password that they've got for your system is the same password they've got for their banking, the same password they've got for M&S that's just been compromised. What we need to be doing is understanding that risk and then using that data to pull back against the information we have from our risk checks to say, hold on, well, Barbara Accounts has got the same password here. We're seeing that on the dark web. We now need to make sure that she's changing her password and the MFA's set and we're monitoring that account. Or maybe we're paying more attention to what our account's doing because we've seen this credential leak. When I run dark web scans with clients, what I always find is a huge amount of credentials that people didn't realize have been lost, and people using their business email address and passwords very similar to the password they use on sites that have been compromised and haven't been made hugely public around their compromises. This allows us to build context-based and informational responses. We need to be looking at all of that data and working out what is right. Where do we lock Barbara's account, even though she's trying to work, because we think it's a risk? And when do we enforce harder checks, increased MFA? All those things come from the context of knowing what risks are out there. And I can guarantee you that most people sat listening to me now won't have technology in place to be doing this. And again, internal and external attack surface management feeds into that. It's that vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, knowing what those systems are doing. So what kind of solutions are you looking for? Well, the big one is what we refer to as ITDR, so Identity Threat Detection and Response, something that's going to pull not just the logs from Entra, but all of the logs that sit inside of your sign-on platforms, pulling that together with information from a dark web scan and a monitoring platform, looking at how your posture sits and comparing that to best practice, to where the risks sit, and giving you that information in a way that you can swallow that. There's a lot of good ITDR products out there. The best ones, again, are the ones that are tied back to your data lake approach, tied back to your centralized management point of view. Again, you want that dark web scanning pulling into the same place. But you just don't want that data sat around. So you either want to be pumping that data to a managed SOC or an MDR service, or to you internally, and feeding your vulnerability information and your pen testing results into this same approach. Because again, if the logins can be compromised because the system is public facing and doesn't have the right protection, it doesn't matter how much work we do with ITDR and posture risk checking. If the front door is essentially left open, then the problem still exists. So this is why you need to look at a wider solution. And it's not just a case of looking at identity. It's really a case of looking at identities and all the pieces that come with it. Now, it wouldn't be a 2026 webinar if I didn't talk about AI. And I'm going to talk about AI in a very different way to the way I suppose we've previously talked about it. If you've heard me talk previously about the cyber risks of AI, you may have heard me talk about this. But what we are seeing becoming a huge problem heading into this year is autonomous agents being used as part of a multi-step attack. So the biggest one is prompt injection or model manipulation. There's lots of great AI tools out there. There's lots of great AI tools that allow you to build your own AI agents and feed in your own data sources. But this means that a bad actor, whether that bad actor be external or internal, can leverage prompt injection to get the AI agent to give them information that it shouldn't be able to. So what we need to do is treat AI agents as kind of first-class identities with their own entitlements, logging in, anonymity detection. We need to be monitoring an AI agent the same way we would mandate and monitor a user. And that's where we tend to see people going wrong, is we see people who will be deploying these AI agents and giving them free reign, giving them too much permission, too much access to AWS, to Azure, to Google, to Docker, to platforms and data sources, giving away the keys to the kingdom to an AI agent that's not properly monitored. Because if you have a way for an AI agent to access that data, then it can be used with the right approach, as it were, with prompt injection to essentially break the system down. So that's what we've got to be thinking about. So what do we need to be thinking about? Right. Well, the first thing is, let's talk about proper AI governance. And this goes beyond just the basics. We're talking about making sure that you're only using the AI tools and technologies that you trust, and that you've approved for your business, and that every other AI platform is disabled. We need to make sure that there is no way that a user can be feeding in data to an AI that you don't trust or don't understand. So that's where blocking becomes much more important, because it's not just saying to a user, the policy says you don't use Grok. The policy needs to say you don't use it, and then we need to put the technical steps in place to make sure that our data doesn't end up there. If we are connecting any agent up to a data source, we need to make sure we've got control of that data and it's appropriately resourced for that AI agent, that it doesn't have carte blanche to go everywhere and do whatever it wants inside that data. It only has access to data that it needs. We need to make sure that agent is hardened. Now, some of the platforms will start doing this by default, but a lot of the time when you start building custom agents, or you have the ability to build your own tool set, your own bots on top of a large language model and all those kind of things, that's when you'll end up in a position where you will have challenges. So we need to be looking at hardening those. We need to be monitoring for threats, just like we would monitor any other system for vulnerabilities. We need to be monitoring these AI agents. AI needs to be monitored in exactly the same way. We need to be thinking about those large language models and whether they've been compromised and what threats exist. We need to make sure that the response automation that we talked about at the very start covers AI completely. And all of it should be done in a human AI collaboration. And we should lead with change. So we do want AI in our business in the right places, but we want to control it and drive it forward. So the solutions you're looking at when we're trying to tackle this problem is around AI acceptable use policies, looking at control platforms. That's what I mentioned about locking down what you don't want to use. We need to do training, so phishing simulation to the next level. We need to do AI training to make sure that users understand the risks of using AI and that we're automating that and we're forcing that forward. We should make sure that if we're going to be doing anything testing wise, we have a sandbox development environment that doesn't have active business data in it, because the worst people for putting data at risks are developers, because you do things quickly, you do things to test things, and you don't go back and shore them up, because you're going from this is a problem, I'm going to solve it, to this is the next problem, I'm going to solve that, and you forget that the security principles should be there. We need to make sure that with all of these tools, we're using advanced data logging and retention, and that at minimum should be 12 months of data that you're holding, and that should tie back to the same SIEM kind of data approach, data lake approach, where you're storing that. And we should be looking at analytics and tooling dashboards to make sure that we understand the usage and we can feed the analytical data back through it to see where the risks exist. If we don't do that, we are just exposing ourselves to further potential risk. Some of the other emerging threats we're starting to see creep through. The big one that probably most of you have seen is hyper-personalized AI-driven social engineering attacks. This is multi-vector. It's not just emails. We're talking about phishing coming through websites, talking about coming through chatbots and coming through support agencies, even phone calls. The ability for AI to support bad actors in developing super personalized persona-based social engineering is becoming a problem. It is making it harder for people to pick it up. Voice cloning, vishing, deepfakes, all these things are coming into the way that social engineering attacks are happening. People need to be vigilant to these. We are seeing that as more people move to sort of software as a service, we're seeing more supply chain and operation authentication abuse. We're seeing, rather than your business being targeted, we're seeing the solution providers, the authentication tools being targeted, because it's actually easier for CRM marketing tools to be compromised for everybody than it is to compromise just your business. And SSO abuse, session hijacks, MFA fatigue, all those things are just getting worse, because they now know that this SaaS platform has 10,000 users where your business only has 100. So they're getting more data, more access for less work. We're seeing a lot of API and integration trust attacks happening. There's a lot of API tools out there that are still using sort of what would be referred to as legacy authentication and encryption protection. Some of them using essentially plain text login details at one end stored in a web interface. We need to be really careful about where we're integrating and what those trust levels are, whether we are pushing and pulling data, whether we allow data to come in unfettered. Just need to be on top of it. We're seeing a lot of IoT footholds as well. As businesses become more smart and we use things like smart light bulbs, and we're talking about having, heating detection based on user footprints and lights that follow people around, all those kind of things, those technologies tend to have the least level of protection on the actual device. The IoT device itself tends to be the most easy thing to compromise. Most of them are built off the same generic bits of hardware, your Arduinos and things like that. What we have to think about is making sure that IoT devices are separated and the lateral movement is protected, so that you can't have any risk of someone either extorting you for the data they're able to compromise there, or causing lateral attacks using IoT as a foothold. And everything comes down to identity-centric intrusions. People are looking more and more at how they get hold of your staff's identities and how they leverage them to compromise you. It's so much easier. Identity-centric attacks are where we are going to see the most space move forward in 2026. Session hijacking through web browsers, SSO abuse, they are all going to come through. So what's actually changing in the landscape? Because we talk about a lot about what the bad actors do, and let's talk about what is changing. Well, we're also seeing, AI assisted discovery of attacks on the rise. We're seeing lots of vendors now using AI to help support attack detection and prevention. Great. We're seeing a wider governance gap, though, this year between the expectations of governance and the technology that exists. As always, even things like ISO 27001, it's 2026. The standard was last updated in 2022. It already feels like it's lost touch a little bit with the technology landscape. And you'll see more and more of that as the standards take more time to update. And we are currently in this massively fast evolving landscape that it feels like the governance you're being asked to tick in some places doesn't match the real world you're sat. All I can ever say is it's better to be ahead of the governance than it is to wait for it to come and kick you from behind. And the big risk that we're seeing coming from the kind of technology landscape is that a kind of autonomous adaptive malware, something where it's changing shape when it's inside the system, and that's where AI is giving some footholds that we don't really want to see. It's really early days for it being kind of detected a lot in the wild, but it's something to be aware of that, legacy AV products are really going to start to struggle as these attack vectors change, and your kind of next gen, as the terrible word, but that kind of next gen approach is going to very much need to be 0 day by basic. You can't have kind of zero. You're going to need zero trust everywhere to make sure that when these things become more prevalent, they get stopped. I talked about the dwell time at the start, and I just wanted to highlight in a bit more detail this kind of AI versus AI problem that we've generated. And this is where that dwell time reduction comes from. So if you look at the left-hand side at the attackers, they are now being able to do discovery, weaponization, intrusion, and exfiltration in a really short AI-driven pipeline. So they are pumping in the discovery information, having AI generate the weaponized attack, break the intrusion, get the data they want out, and then they're on to the next one. It's become so much quicker than it used to be for them to get in and compromise the system. Likewise, as a defender, your tools have got slightly better. So using AI, you're getting better analysis, better response, and better remediation. But we're in this battle, right, of who can be quicker using more advanced AI, and it's where you'll start to see in 2026 vendors really investing is that reduced response time. And don't be surprised when we get to September, October, and all these vendors out there are talking about how quick their time to detection and response is again, because given the speed the bad actors are moving, your tools need to move at the same speed, and it's going to be really interesting to see that happen. So 2026, like, how do we arm your business to make sure that you're really kind of tied up? Let's start from the bottom, right? So your foundational layer, zero trust principles, ZTNA, that kind of approach where you're saying we only give you access to what you need when you need it in a way that we control. Unified logging across the board, telemetry converged in a single platform. That's your foundation. That's a must. When we then look at posture and exposure management, we need to be thinking about SSPM, continuous controls, testing. We're thinking about the vulnerability scanning. We need to be thinking about constantly benchmarking where we sit. I also would tie into that posture and exposure management layer external verification. So your ISOs, your Cyber Essentials, your Cyber Essentials Plus, your NIST, all those kind of things, that sits in that layer. Your next layer up is your detection and response, right? So if you've got your posture right, you've got your exposure reduced, your detection and response layer is there to defend what's beneath it. And that's going to be your XDR tool sets, your managed detection and response tools. It's going to be AI-driven analysis, automated triage, all those things I talked about. That's going to be your detection layer. But you want to be making sure that what that detection layer is looking after is a very robust and strong management layer with a very solid foundation beneath it. And then finally, the big attack surface, the bit that everyone's going to be hitting, is that identity and access layer. And that's where we're looking at IAMs, so identity access management. We're looking at MFA. We're looking at passkeys. We're looking at OAuth governance. We are going to be looking at where we pull that identity data from and how we look at that ITDR response approach. Again, with the access layer, the other big thing that we need to be thinking about is going to be how you're accessing your systems. Now, most of you will be accessing your systems via a web browser for most platforms. Now, that's just the way the world's going. You pretty much 90% of your work is done through a Chrome browser, let's be honest. Now, that's a huge exposure for all businesses. So what you need to be looking at there is a secure web browser approach. So kind of taking away the flexibility to a degree, the risk of what people are doing inside that browser, and using a secure business browser, something that is locked down and has ZTNA, VPN technology, SASE technology, filtering technology built into it natively, and is done in browser, so it provides the most protection for things like session hijacking, for token stealing, for MFA and passkey extraction. If you can put a secure web browser and ITDR at the top layer, less and less is going to trickle through, because we don't want the identities to be compromised to start hitting our detection layer. This is very much the simplified way that we're going to protect businesses in 2026. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about backups and DR, because the reason I've tied this into this conversation is, let's be honest, the reason we have backup and DR is to get us out of the hole when this all goes wrong. But unfortunately, we've reached the position now where so many backup products and so many backup approaches are legacy. And I'm going to say this with all the love in the world, tape backups are legacy backups. They are long-term, slow, and they are in most cases tied to your site. Realistically, you need to make sure that that's not part of your critical protection plan. The other thing is the way that we do backups is very legacy still for a lot of people. We take machines, whether that be physical machines, virtual machines, or even cloud machines, and we sort of smush that information together, that disk, that system information, that platform information, and we make a full system image backup. And then what we'll do is we'll stack a load of incremental changes on top of that to make some kind of synthetic backup image, which for a long time, when Veeam and technologies like that launched, VMware, going back to 4.0, when Veeam first started really making impact, was the best way to do it. But it's a very dated approach, and given the fluidity of the modern sort of environments that we all work in with hybrid cloud and all things like that, we end up in a position where very quickly we are in quite a hard place to respond to and quite a hard place to recover to. So BCDR needs to change in 2026. So this is what we should be looking at. So beyond protection, this is how we should be considering BCDR, business continuity 2026. What we're protecting, we shouldn't really care about, whether it's local devices, whether it's cloud hosted, whether it's modern workplace data. So that I mean 365 G Suite, I mean AWS Azure, I mean VMware, Hyper-V, Azure Stack, physical on-tin devices, even workstations. Those should be what we consider our protected devices. We don't care where they come from. We don't care what they look like. We should be using a single software as a service based platform that can pull any technology into itself and provide fully immutable cloud-based backup storage, with two things. One of them being an automated recovery testing program that you don't have to touch, something that will spin up those images, provide you proof of validity, will send that report to you, whether that's a weekly, daily, monthly, yearly, however often it needs to be done, in a way where you can just go, yes, if I have to recover X machine today, I know it's going to happen. And then from a recovery approach, that single SaaS platform should be completely flexible about how it returns your data, whether that's directly to a new hypervisor, whether that's back to bare metal tin, or whether that's directly to a cloud source. It shouldn't matter what the protected system was from the source level, the destination should be completely flexible. That's where you need to get to, because you cannot control what the DR situation will look like. It could be a loss of a site. It could be the physical loss of service, or it could be a cyber attack that cripples your ability to return to site. You want to be able to go, well, my VMware images, I can now spin up in Azure without having to do any work. Or my VMware images, I'm now going to put to brand new Hyper-V tin that I've just been provided by my insurance provider. The flexibility needs to be there. There is nothing worse than having backups that are platform tied or reliant on physical hardware that you previously have or had in place. That's why I am the biggest advocate for moving away from tapes, because that's always been the thing that lets you down. You can have great tapes, but then if you can't get the same backup unit that you use to take those tapes to recover them from, they often can become pretty useless. Look at future-proofing your backup and disaster recovery with a cloud-first single SaaS platform approach. So simply, what does backup and disaster recovery need to look like in 2026? It needs to be scalable, it needs to be cost efficient, it needs to be built in with AI and automation, especially on that testing piece. It needs to have a massively reduced time to recovery. Immutability needs to be built in. It shouldn't be a toggle switch. It should be, it's immutable, deal with it. And data security has to be at the core of development. So solutions that do this will be modern, cloud-based. There'll be a single pane of glass with 24/7, 365 availability, with full multi-cloud recovery, SaaS, IaaS, and on-premise protection in a single product, with tested, practiced, and prepared approaches. It's all well and good having what you feel is really good, robust backups. If it's not been tested and you haven't used it to do an actual recovery, you will have no idea if it's actually going to work when it comes down to it. So I've talked a lot. 2026, we're a month in. What do you need to be doing? And I've broken this down into essentially some quick sprints, right? So today, finish this call, go and look at your identity hardening. If you have an ITDR product in place, something that will be able to fully understand your complete identity landscape and provide you those risks, go to that. If you don't, go out and look to see what you can get for the technology you have. Our account management team, our technical architects at Planet, will be more than happy to talk to you about what solution from ITDR Spaces fits into your product set. You need to understand that. So enforcing passkeys, phishing resistant MFA, stable OAuth tokens, session telemetry, risk adaptive protection, those kind of things when you think about that's day zero, right? Do that for the next 30 days. Do nothing else but identity. It's your biggest risk factor. It's the one place that most people are weakest on. Let's get that resolved. Once we've done the first 30 days, the next 30 days, I want you to look at sort of software as a service and integrated risk review. I want you to understand where your OAuth tokens are used. I want you to understand your scopes of integrations, where your high risk information is. I want to know about sessions. I want to know about your policies around what's allowed to integrate with what protections are in place, what you're doing to block APIs. I want to understand what that landscape looks like, how it all comes together, where your external risk factors are. That's your next 30 days, because again, that ties back to that highest level risk. Then let's look at governance and look at your essentially SOC sprint, right? So what we need to understand is, what governance are you required to do as a business level? What governance do you have in place? How are you going to govern technologies like AI? How are you going to do privileged access? How are you going to stop your system against sort of prompt injection and run some kind of red team exercise? That's critical at that point to understand your risks, your weaknesses. If you don't already have a managed detection and response or security operations service in place, this is where you're going to be finding that technology and you're going to be finding that partner to work with. You're going to be finding the right thing for your business. You're going to make sure it's automated. You're going to make sure that it can do detections, it can do isolation, it can do deployment detection. It's going to ramp up quickly. That will take you to the 90-day mark. And that's when I want you to look at your BCDR approach. I want you to look at your backup and disaster recovery and say, does my disaster recovery meet the 2026 standard? Or am I still living in a 2024 world where I think that this is still going to work, or I don't really know, I haven't tested it? Run a disaster recovery roundtable exercise. Get someone in, sit around a table with all of your leadership and walk through a live scenario. I can guarantee you the gaps you'll find will be terrifying if you've never done one, and the number of steps that you will have assumed will work will be really high. If you can do this over the next 90 days, by the time we hit the middle of 2026, you're going to dramatically have reduced your risk and pushed yourself ahead of those bad actors. And that's what this year is going to be about. It's going to be about driving forward. So just some key takeaways that I want you to think about. Speed is the risk. Bad actors are getting faster. You've got to be quicker to respond. If you don't have the resources internally, the staff, the understanding, the ability, the tools, that's your problem. You need to increase your speed to response. And if it means outsourcing it, outsource it. Don't think you have to be someone working 24/7 yourself. Identity is the new perimeter. We no longer care about the edge of your network to the degree we used to. We don't care about where your firewall is and what you consider to be your office. Your identity is where that perimeter now exists. So identity detection and response is key. Secure web browsers are key to make sure that you can protect identity and reduce those risk factors. Compliance isn't equal to resilience, but you need to make sure that you are doing the best you can to be compliant with the standards that you're put up against. And then your business continuity and disaster recovery must be AI, SaaS, all those things are included in it. It must be a complete business continuity disaster recovery platform. It is no good saying, I assume Microsoft are going to protect my 365 data. Oh, it's in Azure, it's in AWS. I don't really need to back it up. Your data, your responsibility, single platform, make sure that it works. Many of you will have seen this slide before. And what I want to highlight to you is this. Technical maturity in this space is something which people take for granted. You will often see people invest and then sit and wait for things to go wrong. We are unfortunately on a constant journey of battling bad actors and the threats of the real world. So if you are looking at this stack and saying, well, most of the technology that you have and the tools and the bits and pieces that make it up are in that reactive cybersecurity space, that's not where you want to be. You need to be in this adaptive bucket. You need to have zero trust architecture. You need to have microsegmentation of your networks. You need to be looking at IOC scanning, proactive threat hunting. You need to make sure you've got an MDR, managed detection and response, or a SOC team in place. You need to make sure that you've got SASE technology, secure browsers, CE+, all those things, because those things will help you on that journey to protection. And the less of these you have, the higher risk you are, because what you don't know is what will come back to sting you at the end, because that's really what happens. That said, if you ever need anything from me, you always know you can reach out. From a Planet point of view, we, as always, continue to make sure that we're bringing you the best and latest information possible. So if you're joining us and you're an education customer, our education roundtable is back on the 12th of February. You can scan that code or the link will be in the chat. We're being joined by Microsoft, Sophos, Enable, and Arrow. It's going to be a really great open forum. We've got a whole day to talk through some of these challenges and some other challenges that exist in the space, so definitely do that. And our live hack experience is back for what we're referring to as live hack 2.0, I guess, which is essentially taking the next level of the kind of this information that I've given you into the real world. So you're going to go through that live scenario. You're going to see what happens when it all goes wrong. It's a new session from what happened last time. It's a unique parallel experience. This time we're doing it with Enable. Scan the QR code, secure space, because those seats will go really quickly. But you've all been waiting for. You've all been waiting for me to talk for 48 minutes so that you can get some Amazon vouchers. So I won't hold that back from you. So as always, I'm going to switch screens. I'm going to spin the wheel. It's all anonymized to make things a lot easier. So as it says on the screen, if you were me, if you're James Dow, you work for Planet IT, your name on the wheel would be JDP. We will contact whoever wins after this. So give me 2 seconds and I'm going to swap to the wheel. He says, here's one I made earlier. I didn't make it. Barry made it. So hopefully everyone can see this. I've only got one voucher to give away today, so it's going to be a single spin. So it's going to be over quick, so I might have to build up for it. So here we go, and let's get the wheel spinning. The worst bit about this is I'd never know who it is. I have to wait until I see the spreadsheet afterwards. IZR. So you'll probably know if that's you. Your account manager will be in contact with you shortly after this to sort out getting that voucher over to you. You know, as they always do. If they don't, you can come and chase me and I'll make sure you get it. Let's just bring the presentation back up really quickly. So what I'm going to do now when the presentation catches up with me is I will go to any questions that you do have, just trying to answer them as best as I can do. I can see there's a couple of questions, certainly around sort of dwell time. The dwell time, the kind of the stats that we've got is that it's reduced by about 50%. So where we were seeing most kind of scenarios be around 2 months before anything was detected, we're seeing it come down to about 30 days. Some of them are coming down to even less than that. So the big thing is, depending on what kind of vector they're using to get in, really changes how they are dwelling in the system. It's just something to consider from that scenario. Here we go. The presentation has now come back up. You can tell I'm having technology problems today, can't you? If you do have any other questions, do feel free to drop them to me. What I would always say is I appreciate that some of the questions you may have might be very personal to your business. So you will be able to reach out to me at any time. My email address is there. The QR code takes you to my Booking Me page. I am available to you. I'm more than happy to answer specific questions to your business. We will be putting this recording up on YouTube. Normally takes us probably half a day or so to get the video up in a decent quality. Once that's done, you'll get an email, as we always do, just to follow up to say that it's available alongside the links to those additional events. It goes without saying, thank you very much for kind of giving over your time today to join me. Hopefully that gives you a good indication of what 2026 is going to look like from a threat landscape point of view. And I will speak to you very soon. So without further ado, have a great afternoon, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers. Goodbye.